and then finding them inside. So they're another pest that you need to watch out for during the holiday season. So I thought that this was going to be a kind of nice overall view of this. But before we get into all of that, um, one second. There we go. I wanted to do a little bit of a plug for some opportunities for last minute credits for the year. Just keep in mind that we do offer a lot of recertification credits if you just go to www.npmatraining.org. I know the end of the year is coming up real fast. So if you are missing maybe 1 or 2 credits or even more, we do have options available for you for that. We do offer 16 classes for recertification credit in Texas, and we also have the surrounding states available as well. So if you need other recertification credit for those states, we have that available too. And also, as you're looking into maybe the future, new hires are coming up soon. We do offer bulk discounts on courses. So if you're interested in any of that, you can email me at lrosenwald@pestworld.org for more information about that. But like I said, I know the new hire season is coming up real quick. So if you want to take advantage of that bulk discount option, please let me know. And I'd love to help you out with that. So, all right. So let's talk about spiders. So spiders are kind of a weird section of what we deal with as structural pest management professionals, right? Because they're not insects, but they do occasionally happen, and they can be pretty serious when they happen too, especially if they're a medically relevant species. But really, what I'm going to kind of emphasize today is, spiders are actually pretty cool organisms overall. So we're going to talk a little bit about their behavior and biology and kind of what makes a spider, and then kind of move into some management strategies as well. But, really, when we think about spiders, I think we really think about spiders in the way that they get the Hollywood treatment, right? It's kind of this mentality where it's the big bad foe that the good character has to be. They're kind of gross, they're terrible, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, a lot of the spider species that you're going to be seeing are kind of more like this. They're very innocuous. They really don't want to be bothered in any way, shape, or form. They're not heat-seeking missiles that are going to come find you in the middle of the night. So these guys are really pretty low-key in the grand scheme of things. But before we start talking about spider behavior and all of that, let's first talk about what spiders are exactly, because they're kind of related to insects, right? But they're not insects. So let's break down the taxonomic reasoning for spiders. So they are part of the phylum Arthropoda. The phylum Arthropoda is a huge group that consists of a bunch of different organisms. So the distinguishing features of these guys are that they don't have a backbone. They have exoskeletons that are made out of a hard substance known as chitin. They have jointed legs and appendages that are generally found in pairs, and they have really distinct body segments. So that actually encompasses a pretty wide range of organisms, right? That includes crabs, horseshoe crabs, millipedes, insects, and even some of the more kind of ancient groups like Collembola and things like that. So this is a pretty wide group in the grand scheme of things. But if we go down a step further, these guys are also part of the class Arachnida. So we're getting a little bit more narrowed down. Some of these guys are starting to look a little bit familiar at this point. So these are organisms that have 8 legs generally, although some of them may be modified into pinchers or sensory organs potentially. And almost all of the members of this class are terrestrial. It's very rare that you find an aquatic member of this group. But these guys look pretty familiar, right? We've got some whip scorpions, we've got the regular old scorpions, we've got ticks, we've got mites, and we've got spiders and harvestmen. Now, it is my contractual obligation at this point to mention that harvestmen are not spiders. So there's a couple of key distinguishing features here that lead to that. So number one, harvestmen only feature one body segment. Spiders will actually feature 2 body segments, which we'll talk about a little bit later here. Harvestmen actually do not have venom glands in their fangs, which is one of the key characteristics of spiders. And in addition, harvestmen also lack an organ to produce silk, which is another key characteristic of spiders. Therefore, because of all of these differences, harvestmen actually belong to their own order, which is called the order Opiliones. So once again, even though they look very similar, harvestmen are not spiders. So I know it's easy to get them confused because they 8 legs and they kind of look a little bit similar, but there's some really key distinguishing features to remember about these guys. All right, so moving on to the actual spiders. So spiders are part of the order Araneae, and there's some key features in these guys that kind of separate them out, like we kind of talked about. So number one, they have 2 distinct body segments. In addition to that, they will also have modified fangs that have pores at the end of them. And most species will use this to inject venom into their prey. Now, it's important to note that not every spider has venom. There's actually a couple of documented species that are plant feeders, which is pretty interesting. But either way, they still have those pores at the end of their fangs to kind of inject something into their prey. And lastly, they have that ability to spin silk using an organ called a spinneret. Now, spinnerets are unique to spiders, although there's obviously other members of the arthropods who also weave silk, you know, thinking about caterpillars, so the moths and butterflies, the Lepidoptera, but those are in the insect group. And there's a bunch of other insects that are able to weave silk as well. So, but spiders, like I said, have that specific organ called a spinneret that helps them do that. Current estimates for the order Araneae are 50,000 species worldwide. Now, actually, about 3,800 are currently listed in North America. So these are the ones that we're going to kind of focus on today. But I just wanted to put that number up there just to give you a sense of how big this group actually can be in terms of the diversity and also just pure numbers as well. So let's talk about the body segments. So we're going to use our good friend, the Goliath bird-eating tarantula here, which is actually the largest spider that is known to mankind. So these guys can be pretty huge. Luckily, we don't really find them around here very much. These guys are definitely more a tropical species, the kind of in the rainforest generally. But these guys can get very big. I mean, some records have shown that they are about the size of dinner plates. So these are huge spiders that can be found. But kind of the secret in the spider world is that these guys, despite their size, are actually kind of giant sissies a lot of the ways. So if you see them in the museum or something like that, these guys are pretty scaredy cats, pretty big scaredy cats in the grand scheme of things. But they're a great opportunity to show you the distinctive characteristics of spider anatomy. So we're going to go ahead and do that here. So like I said, spiders have 2 distinct body segments. So number one is the cephalothorax. And you can kind of think of the cephalothorax as the kind of chassis of the spider itself. So this is the part that's going to have all of the legs branching out from it and the other organs that we're going to talk about here in a minute. And then the other body part is the abdomen. So the abdomen is kind of where the engine sits. You know, this is where all of the other organs for the spider really sit. I mean, they do have some organs up front, obviously, but generally most of them are packed into the abdomen there. So those are the 2 distinct body segments of a spider, the cephalothorax and then the abdomen. Spiders are unique in the sense that they also have these organs called pedipalps. So these are sensory organs generally, but they can have a bunch of different functions. So number one, they might use them to help them eat. So they're kind of an extra pair of hands that they can shove things into their mouths with. They will also use them to sense things. So for example, if they're weaving a web, that might be another means that they're able to sense vibrations through the web or through the ground if they're a ground burrowing species. In addition to that, they'll also use their pedipalps for mating. So males have very distinct pedipalps because they will actually use them to transfer sperm to the females. So they're kind of adapted specifically for that. So like I said, the pedipalps have kind of a wide range of things, but really you can just kind of think about it as another extra pair of hands for the spider in a lot of ways. So like I mentioned before, these guys also have fangs, which are specifically called chelicerae. These fangs are specifically modified with that pore on the end, like I mentioned, that they can use to inject venom into their prey. So like I said, this is a pretty distinct characteristic of spiders because not many other arthropods really have those fangs that they're able to inject venom into their prey. Lastly, they also have spinnerets, which is that unique organ that I mentioned that helps them weave their webs. Keep in mind, though, that not every spider will weave webs or necessarily will use silk all the time, but they will use it for occasional things, specifically for egg masses. And also, if they're a ground burrowing species, they kind of might shore up their burrow with some of that silk to kind of prevent the soil from caving in on them. All right, so now we've talked about spider anatomy. Let's next talk about spider identification because there are a lot of species out there that kind of look very similar to one another. So it's very akin to this meme here of the Spider-Man pointing at each other. But, you know, the moral of the story is just keep in mind that there's a lot of different factors that can lead to spider identification and not just coloration and patterning. So number one, let's talk about webs. So first of all, is there one? There's a bunch of species that do not weave webs, pure and plain and simple. So for example, wolf spiders don't weave a web. The only time that they'll kind of use silk is maybe to kind of save themselves from a fall or something like that, or they'll use silk to weave their egg masses as well. So if you don't see a web, that is a pretty key indicator that you're probably dealing with kind of a more ground dwelling species, a more active hunting species, or even ground burrowing species like a tarantula. But if you do see a web, the appearance and decorations can also be a really key feature in determining what species it is. So some species have really messy webs. So black widows are a great example of a really messy web that they build. Brown recluses also have very distinct webs because they have a tendency to kind of slide into really tight spaces and then we'll weave really flat webs in order to kind of accommodate those tight spaces. But also some of them are really beautiful, right? So think about some of the garden spiders, like this guy here. You know, that looks a little bit more neat compared to some of the other spiders. But it also might feature decorations as well, like this garden spider is illustrating here. So that zigzag pattern right here is actually pretty key that to this genus, which is Argiope. So this can also be a key characteristic that you are dealing with that genera of spider. And in addition to that, also think about the location of the web. You know, they're pretty consistent in terms of where they want to weave their webs. So American house spiders, for example, really like lower corners. They don't really like going up high. But cellar spiders, on the other hand, really love those high corners that aren't really going to get dusted very often. But also for garden spiders, for example, these guys love to build their webs in open awnings that they're able to kind of spread the web between, you know, maybe two pillars, but it'll face out into open field or something like that. So they have the opportunity to kind of get more prey coming into their webs from there. Also thinking about spider identification, let's talk about body length and proportions, right? So the cephalothorax to abdomen proportion can be really distinctive for a bunch of species, and that can really kind of point you one direction or another. So American house spiders, for example, they have the kind of really small circular cephalothorax, but then they kind of have a big booty to go along with it. So that big abdomen is a pretty key characteristic that you might be dealing with in American house spider. But in addition to that, also think about the length of legs. So like I mentioned, cellar spiders too, these are another great example of not only that cephalothorax to abdomen ratio. So cellar spiders will have that really long, kind of more oval abdomen compared to any other spider. But cellar spiders are also really distinctive based on the fact that their legs just look way too long for the rest of them. So that can be another really key characteristic as well. So just kind of thinking about the gestalt of the spider overall. And lastly, just look at general size too. That can be a really key characteristic. You know, and spiders have a wide range of sizes that they come in. So these are some jumping spiders as an example of how small they can be on somebody's finger. But obviously a tarantula is going to basically take up their whole hand, right? So there's a lot of different variation that can come with this. So think about body length and proportions just in general, but also kind of in the pieces of the spider that are put together as well. Eye arrangement is a huge key characteristic of spider identification. So this is what I always ask for whenever somebody sends me a picture of a spider for identification. I always try to go off of eye arrangement because they're very distinctive between species. Um, and also think about the number of eyes. You know, we always say that spiders have 8 eyes, but that's actually not true for every species. And one of the key species that this is not true for is actually brown recluses. So brown recluses actually only have 6 eyes that are arranged in 3 pairs. So this is a key characteristic of brown recluses that I normally ask people to try and identify if they're trying to identify brown recluses or the Loxosceles genus. Lastly, we're going to talk about coloration and patterning. You know, I will give you the fact that some of these guys are really easy to tell based on coloration and patterning. You know, obviously a black widow is recognizable to pretty much everyone, right? So that really kind of shiny black color with that red hourglass can be really distinctive and can immediately tell you that that's a black widow. But, you know, sometimes the red hourglass isn't always visible, or you're not able to kind of, you know, look under the web to see that that's in fact a black widow. And also, in addition to that, you know, there are a bunch of lookalikes out there. So this is actually a grass spider, but it really does look like a wolf spider in a lot of ways. So don't just go off of coloration and patterning. Use the other facets of identification that we just talked about in order to kind of identify the spider. So for example, grass spiders really are pretty distinctive in the fact that they will weave a web. And their web is very distinctive because it actually is pretty funnel shaped. So that is a key characteristic that this is a grass spider over a wolf spider. But also, you know, if you're able to catch that species or that specimen, then you can also take it back to a microscope, take a look at the, or use a hand lens to take a look at the eye arrangement just to confirm that that's in fact what you're dealing with. We'll also talk about spider hair too. I mean, you know, spiders use their hair for a bunch of different reasons. Most of the time it's for sensory purposes. It's kind of their means of the spider senses, right? So these guys can be either really hairy, like tarantulas, or they look pretty svelte, to put it lightly. So these guys will also kind of have an kind of more less hairy appearance, but they will still have hairs because these are the ways that spiders are able to sense their world. So they might use them for smell, but they also might use them for just general vibration sensing opportunities too. So talking about the spider life cycle, so spiders actually go through incomplete metamorphosis. So the adult female will lay some eggs. Those eggs will hatch out, and the spiderlings are called nymphs or spiderlings. They usually have 7 to 9 instars. It depends on the species. And then once they do, they grow to adulthood and can kind of move on from there. Now, spiders do this process by going through molting, where they're kind of going to pop the chassis off and will pop the back, and then we'll kind of wiggle all of their legs out, and then we'll have a new spider underneath. So they'll do this every time they get a little bit too big for their skin, and then they'll have a couple of hours or so that their exoskeleton isn't quite hard enough, but this is generally the way that they will get a little bit bigger for themselves. Now, spider life cycle, the longevity of spiders really depends on species. You know, some spiders will really only live for a couple months, but some have been known to live for decades. So tarantulas are a great example of this. Some tarantula species have been known to live for almost 50 years in captivity, but the world's oldest recorded spider out in the wild was actually a female trapdoor spider who lived to be 43 years old. So she made it longer than I have been in this world so far. So you know, just to give you a sense of like how complex their life cycles can be and how long their life cycles can be potentially as well. All right, so let's talk about spider reproduction. So spider reproduction is kind of wild in a lot of ways. It kind of rivals bed bugs, in my opinion, in terms of how wild their reproductive capabilities can be. So males tend to be smaller than the females. So this is actually a brown widow group that's here. So the males are, you can see the male just right up here above the female here. You can see those pedipalps a little bit right there. So the male will kind of sit on top of the female and then will transfer sperm to the female using those pedipalps. But there's some ways that the males kind of make themselves more appealing to the females. So number one, they might present some gifts to the females, or they might also do some dances. They might do some vibration patterning. That's a little different. But the jumping spiders are particularly my favorite because the internet has had an amazing time with the jumping spider dances that have been known in the world. So these guys are pretty great. There's another great one that has the YMCA song by the Village People going on in the background with the spiders doing their dances, which is pretty great. So highly recommend looking that up if you ever need a good laugh. But yeah, so anyway, spider reproduction can be pretty complicated. But also, you know, spiders are, especially the males, are really kind of at a disadvantage in terms of how they are presenting themselves to the females. So, you know, we always hear about the black widows where they're going to immediately eat the males right afterward. And it turns out that that's actually really not always the case. And males actually have some pretty neat ways of getting around that, such as this spider here, this American house spider that shows that they will actually almost physically push themselves away from the female if they sense some danger alert there. So just to keep in mind that, you know, their behavior can be pretty complex and they do have some pretty neat adaptations in terms of how they get things done. So now that we talked about the males, the spider moms are actually some of the best moms in the arthropod world, I think. So spiders will often lay their egg masses following mating. You know, they might hang around and kind of guard that egg mass. Some of them just kind of leave it be and will have them fend for themselves. But a lot of them will actually hang around, protect the egg mass as best they can. Some spider moms will actually even go one step further and will actually carry them around in their chelicera for a while. Cellar spiders are a great indicator of this. And so they'll kind of carry them around until they start hatching out, and then she'll kind of move on from her life there. But probably the best indicator of a spider mom is wolf spiders. So wolf spiders will actually carry the egg mass with them for a very long time until the spiderlings hatch out. And then the spiderlings will actually crawl onto mom's back for a while until they get big enough and strong enough in order to balloon away. So they'll actually weave a strand of silk that will get caught on the wind, and then they'll kind of actually just disperse that way. So these guys are actually, like I said, some of the great indicators of how great spider moms can be. All right, so let's talk about spider behavior. Specifically, let's talk about feeding behavior. So these guys are opportunistic predators most of the time. They're going to kind of just eat whatever comes their way. They're really not sort of hunting anything in particular, just really love to eat whatever comes their way. Mostly it's going to be other arthropods, but they're kind of not picky as long as it has protein. Overall, they're estimated to eat 400 to 800 million tons of insects per year. So this is actually a great method of biological control. And there's a bunch of studies out there that actually show how beneficial they are to agricultural systems, because they're really keeping a lid on that pest situation that a lot of those farmers are dealing with on the regular. And normally they'll go after prey dependent on how big they perceive the prey item to be. So they generally won't go after things that are larger than them because they know they won't win that fight. But they will generally try to go after things that are smaller than them, but they'll kind of do a little bit of calculation process there before they actually go after whatever they're going to go after. Even especially if it gets stuck in their web or something like that, you know, sometimes they'll get a little too scared for something that's a little too big for them, then go after it. So let's talk about the different ways that spiders hunt, because there's actually a broad spectrum of the different ways that spiders hunt. So first off, we have the active hunters. Wolf spiders are a great example of this. These guys will just kind of actively stalk around looking for prey. We can see here that this one went after a yellow jacket here. So they illustrating once again what great biological control these guys can potentially be in the right situations. Web spinners are probably the one you're most thinking about. You know, we always think about this classic spider in the, the poor prey item in the web. The spider goes after it. Some of them will inject their venom and kind of let that process, let that marinate a little bit, and then go back and feed on it later. Some of them will just kind of jump on it right away. It just kind of depends on the spider. But there's some really cool variations of web spinners other than the traditional web weavers. So I thought I'd show you a couple of videos of this. So part two are some of the more active web spinner hunters, such as the spider that's seen here. So they'll actually weave a little net for whatever prey item that they're going after, and then we'll actually nab it using that. So that's pretty neat. And then also there's one called the bolus spider, which is named after the weapon that a lot of the Mexican banderos would used to use for hobbling horses and things like that. So these guys will actually weave a little strand of silk, and then they'll actually mimic the moth pheromone on that little dot at the end of it. So they'll make a little droplet of a moth pheromone that is a female moth. And so they'll kind of lure in the male moths with this droplet of pheromone because moths are super, super keyed into that when it's mating season. And so the male moth will come in being like, oh my gosh, what an awesome lady I've found. And then the bolus spider will actually kind of whip that little dot around, and it's actually a sticky drop, and it will nab that moth and then bring it in. So it's actually a pretty unique way of hunting. That's pretty cool. So we also have the stalkers. So these are your jumping spiders generally. So these guys will actually kind of go after, will actively hunt prey in a lot of ways, but they are definitely more sit and wait. Compared to the wolf spiders. So these guys will kind of generally sit and wait for their opportunity to jump in this occasion. And these guys are amazing jumpers that can jump pretty much like the size of a football field, like if it was compared to our size. So it's pretty amazing what these guys can do. There's also ambushers. So crab spiders are a great example of this. So they'll actually sit in a lot of flowers waiting for a pollinator to come by in order to feast on that pollinator. So these guys are also really cool because they mimic the UV reflection of a lot of flowers as well. So the pollinator will be extra drawn in to that flower thinking that it has a lot of nectar, but nope, it just has a crab spider waiting to nab it. And these guys are really, really good at their jobs on that front. And of course, we have the burrowers. So those tarantulas that I was talking about earlier, you know, these guys will kind of are also a version of sit and wait. They're a little bit the stalker vibe, but these guys generally will sit outside their burrows until something comes along, and then they're able to grab it from there. So the kind of key thing I wanted to emphasize about this is, what do all these spiders have in common? And the main thing is that they're all going to place themselves where they can find food, right? So these guys are all focused on where the food is. And even though some of them might be a little bit more active than others, they're going to be found where they can find food. So now that we've talked about all that, let's talk about some of your friendly neighbor spiderhood men and women. So we'll go through some of the species that are pretty common, at least in North America. And we'll start off with probably the most infamous of all of them, which are the black widows. So this is the genus Latrodectus. These guys are medically relevant because they do feature latrotoxin. Now, it's important to note that only the adult females are capable of biting deep enough to inject latrotoxin into your skin. But generally, if you wear gloves or other PPE, that's enough to protect you from that kind of thing. It's more when they just happen to hit bare skin. But if you do happen to get bit, the symptoms of latrotoxin tend to be immediate pain, swelling at the bite site, severe muscle pain or spasms, and increased heart rate. Now, most of the time, you'll be fine if you are a healthy individual, but obviously if you are a small child or maybe an elderly adult or immunocompromised, this can be a really serious issue. So if you happen to get bit, please go to a doctor and seek medical care if you think that you've been bit by a black widow. So there's three species of black widows in North America. We have the northern, southern, and western. Now the northern is actually pretty easy to distinguish because, as you can see here, they feature kind of a break in the hourglass that's pretty distinctive. But like I said, that's not always easy to see. So don't go off of just that. The southern and western black widows are actually pretty morphologically similar, so it's really difficult to tell the difference between them. But you can kind of go off of where you find them. Unfortunately, though, for you guys in Texas, they're both in the same place. So that's unfortunate. But generally, if you have a black widow, it's pretty easy to tell, like we talked about earlier with the coloration and the patterning. Like I said, shiny black with that distinctive hourglass shape, but it's not always present. And these guys are also really distinctive because they have very messy, irregular webs that they have a tendency to build in cellars and dark corners that are shaded, that they really won't be disturbed in very much. It's also important to mention that we now have brown widows in North America as well. This is Latrodectus geometricus. These guys are actually very pretty spiders, I have to say. So these guys are cousins of the black widows. So obviously same genus, but different species. These guys are able to produce latrotoxin, just not in the same amounts as their cousins. So they're not as medically relevant, but if you happen to get bit by one, still seek medical attention if you're as soon as possible. This is an invasive species that actually does appear to be pushing out black widows for the same habitats, interestingly. So I guess good news on that front because they're not as medically relevant. But black widows are the native species compared to the brown widows. These guys are, like I said, really pretty spiders. They have a light brown patterning. The reason why they're called geometricus is because of their geometric patterning that they have on their bodies. But they will feature an orange hourglass compared to a red hourglass that the black widows have. And these guys also have messy, irregular webs as well, much like their cousins. And also, I wanted to do a little bit of a plug here too. So, if you want to learn more about the Latrodectus species, I actually wrote an entire article about the widows that you can find in North America, including the ones that we just talked about, and also including the red widow and also the brown widow as well. So these are the 5 that you'll generally find in North America, although the red widow is kind of more restricted to Florida. But either way, this is a free update that's available to you all if you want to check it out. You can find it on NPMA's website, and it was featured in an article at Pest World. So, all right, so let's talk about the other medically relevant species in North America. So this is the brown recluse, Loxosceles reclusa. So these guys are medically relevant. Again, like I mentioned, they feature a different kind of a toxin. So this one is called sphingomyelinase D. This one is pretty nasty if you happen to get bit by it. So the symptoms of this are nausea, fever, rashes, muscle and joint pain, and sometimes, very rarely, necrotic lesions at the bite site. So this is a pretty serious spider. Again, if you are kind of on the healthier side, you're probably going to be okay. I mean, still go see a doctor for an antitoxin, but very much a concern if you are a child or an elderly individual or immunocompromised. These guys enjoy tight, dark spaces, like I mentioned before. They love cardboard boxes, so they are easily transported compared to other spiders, just because they really like that flat space in between, and they weave those really flat webs. So these guys are really easily transported all across the world, even not just within North America. These guys generally are about the size of a nickel for the most part. They tend to be tan to dark brown, and they're commonly distinguished by this violin pattern that you can kind of see here. So they're also called fiddle spiders on occasion. But the fiddle or violin shape on their cephalothorax isn't always present. So this isn't always a sign that you should go off of. Like I said, please go off of the eye count instead, because that is right away you know that you're dealing with Loxosceles if you see only 6 eyes compared to 8. So that is the key characteristic there. And like I mentioned, these guys have pretty flat, irregular webs that are very distinctive. And like I said, they normally have a tendency to kind of weave them in between things like cardboard boxes and other stored items. But overall, like I mentioned with all of this, if you have concerns about a spider bite, seek a medical professional. Maybe not Doc Ock, but seek a medical professional on any of these because they can be very, very serious if left untreated. All right, so kind of moving into the less serious ones. So let's talk about cellar spiders. So these guys are part of the family Pholcidae. They are the most common species that you'll probably run into is Pholcus phalangioides. This one is found all over the world. These guys are yellow, brown, or gray. They mostly are distinguished, like I talked about earlier, with the length of the legs and the abdomen. So that really kind of long oval-shaped abdomen. These guys have 8 eyes, one pair in front, and then they have 3 clusters on the side. And then they also have those messy webs that, like I mentioned, are built in upper corners of buildings and rooms and crawl spaces. So they really like those upper areas where they're less likely to be disturbed. Also, let's talk about the American house spider, kind of a similar species, but instead kind of on the lower levels. These guys are also commonly called the common house spider. So these guys are found worldwide, like the cellar spiders. This spider actually features a very distinct difference between the males and the females. So once again, much like other spider species, males are smaller, but these guys tend to be more red in color and have a more elongated abdomen. But the females will be larger, light brown with a mottled appearance, and will feature kind of more of a teardrop abdomen and will be a little bit thicker. And like I mentioned before, their webs are generally built in the lower corners of buildings. All right, so this one is also a very common one that I get calls about a lot. So this is the garden spider. This is the genus Argiope. So there's many different names for these spiders. I've heard zipper spiders. I've heard garden spiders. I've heard yellow and black spiders. You name it, I've heard it. So there's a bunch of different common names for these spiders, but normally I just go off of garden spider. These guys are very large and conspicuous. They look very scary, and you get a lot of panic calls about them, but these guys are very low key. They just want to hang out in their webs. But they generally feature some combination of black, yellow, and white patterning, and males might feature some red and orange depending on the species. These webs, like I mentioned before, are often built in areas that face open fields because they want that easy access to prey items that are just going to fly right in from the field. And like I also mentioned before, these webs are easily distinguished by that zipper or zigzag pattern. And it's thought to be for stabilization of the web because they're building such large webs, but we don't really quite know why they like to do that. All right, so moving on to kind of more of the wandering species. These are the wolf spiders, so the family Lycosidae. This is actually a pretty large family, but around 200 species of these spiders are found in the United States. Like I mentioned before, these guys are active ground hunters, and they are pretty large spiders, not as large as the tarantulas, but will still give enough concern for your clients that they might call you up. But they will have a kind of a hairy appearance, but will usually be dark brown with stripes and or markings of some sort. But like I said, they don't weave webs, so that's a key characteristic if you are seeing these guys and you don't see webs. Oops. Okay, and lastly, the thing about them is that they have a pretty distinct eye arrangement of 4 in the front and then 2 and 2 kind of on the side. So the 2 will be kind of up here, and then the other 2 will be kind of on the side of their little cephalothorax there. All right, so lastly, or not lastly, but one of my favorite species groups is the jumping spider. So the family Salticidae. So these guys are the largest family of spiders, and there's actually around 300 species in North America. I think these ones are the cutest spiders because they are generally feature splashes of color and then also have those flat faces with the arrangement of the 4 prominent eyes. So they really look like they have cute little faces that are just staring up at you. They generally tend to be kind of medium sized, but they can be pretty small too, like that other picture I showed you with the one on the finger. And generally the ones that we have are going to be brown, black, or gray, but like I said, might have splashes of color like this one here. And these guys are really distinctive because they will move in a jittery fashion that no other spider will move like. So these guys are pretty easy to spot. And also, like I said, they are excellent jumpers. Some of the best jumpers, not only in the entomological kingdom, but the animal kingdom in general. All right, so let's talk about tarantulas because you guys are lucky enough to have them down there. So this is the family Therapsidae. or Theraphosidea, excuse me. So there's two main groups of tarantulas. There's the New World tarantulas and the Old World tarantulas. We have the New World tarantulas, which are the nicer tarantulas, I would say. The Old World ones can be kind of mean, but there's around 1,100 species worldwide. So this is a pretty broad group as well. Unfortunately, though, with the New World tarantulas that we have, they are kind of the more boring looking tarantulas. They are large, they are hairy, they are brown. They're pretty easy to spot in the grand scheme of things. These guys do feature urticating hairs, though, so they'll actually kind of brush them off if they think that they're in danger, and will these hairs will cause skin irritation. And actually, one of the fun facts about tarantulas is that these urticating hairs is actually what sneezing powder is made out of. It's actually ground up tarantula hairs because it will give that kind of tingling sensation. So, so just a fun fact to tell your friends at the next cocktail party. But these guys generally spend the majority of their time in their burrows. The males will kind of wander around during mating season, and this is probably when you're going to get the most calls about these because people are so worried about all of these tarantulas suddenly walking around. But the males are pretty one-track minded, not to disparage males in any group, but they are really kind of focused on just finding a mate for the mating season before that. Okay, so we'll do a little quick break here just to do a little Slido so you can scan that QR code if you have your phone in front of you. And I was just kind of curious to see which spiders you get the most calls for in your area if people want to join in. Oh, we got a person typing. It's happening. Two. Oh man. Okay, it's happening. Yeah. Yeah, the brown recluse is very misidentified a bunch of the times. Like I said, there's a lot of spiders that look very similar, and pretty much if anybody sees anything small and brown, that's generally what they're going to be calling you for. Wolf spiders are another good one, mostly because, especially now is the time when people are bringing in firewood to their homes. So they're often bringing in wolf spiders without realizing it because a lot of wolf spiders like to hole up in firewood for those periods of time. Um, Chime in, give it a little bit. I saw somebody else typing, but it's okay if we don't. All right. Well, we'll just move on from there. But thank you for chiming in. Okay, so now we know the players of the game. How do we manage them? How do we bring Jonah Jonas and Spider-Man? So first of all, let's do an inspection, right? So inspection is going to be the first step in any sort of management strategy for spiders. So what do you need to look for when you're looking for an inspection? So number one, the spiders themselves, right? So you got a call because about them, but also look for evidence of spiders too. So look for the webs, look for their molts, dead bug carcasses, egg masses, etc. Molts and egg masses can often provide evidence for how long an infestation has been there. Molts in particular, because like I said, remember the nymphs need to go through 7 to 9 instars in order to reach adulthood. So that can be a really key characteristic. So if you see a bunch of kind of progressively getting larger spider molts, then that can be a really key indicator that they've been there for kind of a while. Also think about conducive conditions. You know, they love those low disturbance environments and warm places with food. So keep that in mind whenever you're looking for things in terms of your inspection. And also, like we talked about, identification is super important. You know, there's a bunch of different characters in the Spider-Verse that we talked about, and a lot of them can look pretty similar. But some of them are obviously more concerning than others, especially the medically relevant ones. So just be sure that you're dealing with the right spider. And also, not only in addition to that, dealing with the right pest too. So I actually have a story about this. So I got a call from my mother actually, and she said, Laura, there's a bunch of spiders in our pantry. And I said, huh, that's kind of weird. So the next time I was over at their house, I popped my little head in there and I immediately saw this. So I saw that cellar spider, in that upper kind of corner of our pantry. But the thing that I noticed most was actually what was right next to that spider, which was some little bits of another insect that I noticed from there. So then I kind of did a look around, and then I realized that we actually had some damage to our packaging, food packaging and things like that. And there was some other evidence of that. And it turned out that we actually just had an Indian meal moth infestation in our pantry. But because the Indian meal moths were there, the spiders were also there. So the moral of this very brief story is that spiders are often indicator pests. They are a waving red flag that there's something else going on here generally. So really try to use your spider senses, as it may be, to really kind of get down to the root of the problem, because spiders are there for a reason. They want to be near their food. They need food, water, and harborage. That's what every pest needs. And spiders are predators, so they're going to be near their pests, near other pests, I should say. All right, so let's talk about non-chemical methods. So spiders can be pretty easily managed using non-chemical methods, talking about exclusion, sealing those cracks and crevices, installing screens, making sure that you're not bringing in firewood that hasn't been checked over into the home. So that those kinds of easy things that are you can do. Changing exterior lighting can be a key one. Remember how many pests might come to some lights at night. So really think about changing exterior lighting, maybe the timing or even the actual lights themselves, because some wavelengths are more attractive to insects than others, which would really kind of cut down on the spiders in the area. Also, implementation of a cleaning schedule can be really helpful, making that harborage really not appealing to the spiders if you're regularly cleaning on and they have to rebuild their webs on a regular basis. Improvement of ventilation. They really like kind of still areas. So if you add a fan, that can really make a difference. They don't like being jostled around all the time for that. Then, like I said, overall goal is to make the harborages less appealing to the spiders. And then a caveat for the next methods that we'll talk about, read the label first. The label is the law. There are a bunch of products that are out there for spiders, but really what you want to do is focus the applications on areas of activity and harborages. Aerosols can be a great option, non-residual or residual, especially if it's an area that particularly sees a lot of activity. You can put in a residual there. Dust can be a great option too. But the main thing to remember with your chemical methods is that spiders are easily disturbed, especially the web weaving ones. They may drop and run to seek cover if they get any sense that there's something amiss in their environment. So just remember that when you're applying your chemical methods. Documentation is also key. I barely remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So how are you going to remember what you did on that last call that you applied pesticides at? So really what I beg you all to do is don't be this guy. This is my favorite picture that I show in all of my presentations. Don't be this person that this is their means of documentation. There's so many better ways of doing this. And also it's really going to help you, and not only you, but also your client the next time that you're at their home. And also education is key. Number one, you guys are here listening to me yabber on at an early hour in the morning, but also educating your clients, taking the time to explain to them why they're seeing this many spiders. I had to actually do this with my mom when we were talking about the spiders in the pantry, where I said, we really should think about putting things in containers, really cleaning out on a more regular basis, and then we won't see spiders in the pantry. And my mom was like, oh, okay. And you know what? It works. So education can really go a pretty long way in terms of not only management of spiders, but management of other pests as well. All right, so just to wrap this all up, spiders are a very diverse group of arthropods with some really cool biology and behavior, and I hope that you've seen that today. And In terms of structural pest control, spiders are indicator pests. So they are a clear red flag that something else is going on here most of the time. And spider management obviously relies on the key concepts of integrated pest management. So, using all of those tools in your toolbox that you're able to use in terms of spider management, not only of spiders, but also of perhaps the other pests that might be in the area as well. And okay, that's all I had for you all today. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them now. But if you also have any other questions for me, or again, want to reach out about bulk discounts on training courses, you're welcome to email me at the following email address. But once again,